Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Incomplete Talks with Mohsin and Mamul. Today we're going to be diving into a moment that seriously shook the world, and people are still talking about it, that unbelievable clash between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky, which was caught on camera for everyone to see.
Yeah, it was more than just a clash. I think it really showed how unstable the relationship is between the U.S. and Ukraine. And it might even have shown some cracks in the entire global order.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit to give everyone some context. The Russia-Ukraine war is raging on. Millions of people have died. And it's basically become this horrible stalemate. And Zelensky's in the White House, the cameras are rolling, and it seems like he's just there to ask for help, to try to find some way to have a lasting peace with Russia. But then something happens that is not diplomatic at all.
Yeah, the tension just keeps increasing. And then Trump, out of nowhere, demands 50% of Ukraine's natural resources and says that's what it will take for the U.S. to support them. It was such a crazy demand that even the media were comparing it to colonialism, almost like something the East India Company would have done.
I can't even imagine being Zelensky at that moment. Talk about pressure, needing help for his country that's being destroyed by war, and then he gets hit with this demand for basically half of Ukraine's wealth.
Yeah, his response was actually pretty amazing. He refused to sign what a lot of people were calling an economic colonization deal and stood strong against this huge amount of pressure from Trump.
And that's when things really get out of control, because Trump, in front of all these people, calls Zelensky a dictator and even makes some threats that are barely hidden. You can just feel the mood of the room completely change.
And even with all of this going on, you can see that Zelensky is trying to get the conversation back to what's actually happening in Ukraine. He explains in a really calm way how Putin has broken ceasefires over and over and over, and he highlights just how urgent the situation is and is totally contradicting Trump's dismissive attitude. And I think it's a really powerful moment that shows just how fragile any hope for peace really is.
But instead of offering any real solutions or anything helpful, Trump just keeps making these aggressive, almost bullying comments. Even VP Pence, who's sitting there quietly, looks like he's trying to stop things from totally blowing up.
It's honestly hard to watch, especially when Zelensky brings up the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, where Ukraine gave up all its nuclear weapons so that Russia, the U.S., and the U.K. would guarantee their security. You can hear the betrayal in his voice, like he's realizing that those promises don't mean anything anymore.
It's a pretty stark reminder of what's at stake here and how this meeting is about way more than just two guys who don't like each other.
Exactly. This is about the safety of a whole country, about whether international agreements actually mean anything. And maybe it's even a sign that things are changing in terms of global power.
The meeting ends pretty suddenly without any resolution, and the consequences of this meeting are almost as bad as the meeting itself. Trump accuses Zelensky of disrespecting America, while Zelensky makes a bunch of sarcastic thank you posts on social media. This isn't just a little disagreement between countries. This is a huge international incident.
And it really makes you wonder, what was Trump thinking? What was making him act this way? Was it just that he didn't like Zelensky, or was there something bigger going on behind the scenes?
Right, because even before this meeting, there were already a lot of questions about Trump's views on the war and about his history with Russia. Some people were even saying that what he was doing was directly helping Russia and hurting Ukraine's chances of survival.
Yeah, it definitely made people think that Trump's foreign policy was pro-Russia, and maybe his personal interests were affecting the decisions he was making that impacted the entire world.
And people around the world were shocked and angry about this meeting. A lot of people felt like America had betrayed Ukraine, especially because they had given up their nuclear weapons because they thought they were getting security in return. But now it seems like those promises are worthless.
It made a lot of countries wonder if America could be trusted as an ally, and whether they would actually keep their promises on the world stage.
This is a great place to stop. For now, we've set the scene, talked about the drama of that meeting, and started to think about what this means for the whole world.
But we have a lot more to uncover. Was this just a one-time thing, or was this a sign of something much bigger? And what does it mean for how power will work globally in the future?
We're going to get into those questions and more when we come back, so don't go anywhere. And while you're waiting, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you can see more incomplete talks with Mohsin and Mamul like this. We've got some interesting stuff planned, including whether a Trump return would be good or bad for Pakistan. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. We'll see you soon.
Welcome back to Incomplete Talks with Mohsin and Mamul. So before we went to break, we were talking about the really intense meeting between Trump and Zelensky and how it was way bigger than just a personal disagreement. It was a huge incident for the whole world.
Yeah, you could really say it was a turning point, and it's hard to explain just how big of an impact it had on everyone globally. So let's talk about what happened afterward. We already talked about how people around the world were angry and felt like Ukraine had been betrayed. But what happened to America's relationships with its allies?
Well, it's pretty obvious that this whole thing really hurt America's reputation as someone other countries could trust to have their back. A lot of America's usual partners, especially in Europe, were shocked and disappointed.
Yeah, like they couldn't believe that the leader of the U.S. would be so careless and just ignore international agreements like they didn't matter.
Exactly. And this wasn't just like a one-time mistake. This was just one part of a pattern of things Trump was doing that were already making other countries nervous. His America First idea, pulling out of international deals, trade wars, all of those things made other countries feel uneasy about America's role in the world.
It seems like that incident with Zelensky was the final straw.
You could say that, yeah, it really made all those anxieties that other countries were already feeling about America's leadership, or really lack of leadership, very real.
So what happened next? Did other countries just sit there and watch as America seemed to be falling apart?
Not really. What happened was other countries started to change how they interacted with the U.S. They realized they couldn't depend on America to keep the world safe or to be the one who leads international cooperation anymore.
So they had to start looking for someone else, someone they could actually trust to be a good partner.
Exactly. We started to see a lot more diplomacy happening, and countries made new alliances or made their old ones stronger. Europe, for example, started taking a more active role in protecting itself and making sure it was safe, and they started relying less on NATO and the U.S., which is what they usually did.
And this was all happening at the same time that other powerful countries like China were becoming more important.
Right, China, with its growing economy and military, was happy to take over the space that America was leaving behind. We saw them spending tons of money on building things all over the world, increasing their military presence, and basically acting more powerful on the world stage.
So it's like the world went from being controlled by just the U.S. to being controlled by lots of different powerful players.
That's a really good way to put it, and this change is still happening. We're in the middle of this huge shift in how power works globally, and no one knows for sure what's going to happen in the end.
This is all really interesting, but it's also kind of scary. What does this mean for world peace and whether things will stay stable?
That's the big question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there isn't an easy answer. A world with many powerful countries could be more stable because power is spread around more, but it could also be more unpredictable with more chances for countries to fight or misunderstand each other.
So are we moving toward a world that's much more chaotic, where everyone is just trying to get as much power as possible?
It's definitely possible, but it doesn't have to be like that. I think the most important thing is for countries to try to work things out peacefully and cooperate with each other and follow the rules of international relations. If we can do that, then this world with many powerful players could actually be more peaceful and successful for everyone.
That's a nice thought. But what about countries like Ukraine, who are stuck in the middle of all this competition between the big, powerful countries? What does this new world order mean for them?
That's a really important question, and it's one that we're going to explore more in the next part of our Incomplete Talks.
Welcome back to Incomplete Talks with Mohsen and Momol. We've been talking about the fallout from that crazy meeting between Trump and Zelensky and how it showed some really big changes that are happening around the world.
Yeah, it's like that meeting was a wake-up call, and suddenly everyone realized that the world was becoming a different place, not just one superpower controlling everything, but lots of different countries, all competing for power and influence.
And right in the middle of all this are countries like Ukraine, who are trying to figure out how to deal with this new and kind of scary world.
Exactly. And for Ukraine, the shift away from a world dominated by the U.S. is especially worrisome. They were really depending on America to help them fight against Russia, and then all of a sudden, it seemed like they might not get that help anymore.
Especially after Zelensky said no to Trump's demand for half of Ukraine's resources. It's like that refusal really showed the problems in their relationship and made people wonder if the U.S. would really be there for them when they needed it.
That's a real danger for countries like Ukraine in this new world where lots of different countries have power. They become like pieces in a game between superpowers, and what happens to them depends on the decisions of leaders like Trump, who seem to care more about getting what they want personally than about following international agreements or supporting democratic values.
And it's not just about military support either. The economic impact of this whole thing is really important too. Ukraine is already struggling because of the war, and if they lose potential aid and investment from the U.S., it could make things even worse for them.
It's a tough situation, but in this new world order, economic power is a really strong tool, and countries like Ukraine are in a vulnerable position. They could get squeezed from all sides. They can't afford to make any potential partners angry, but they also can't let themselves be taken advantage of or used by someone else for their own benefit.
So what can countries like Ukraine do? How can they survive and even do well in this new, more complicated world?
That's a really tough question, and there's no easy answer. But one thing is for sure, they need to be smarter and more flexible than ever before.
So what does that look like, practically speaking? Can you give us some examples?
Well, one thing they need to do is build relationships with more countries. They can't just rely on one country like the U.S. to save them. They need to build stronger connections with countries all over the world, from Europe to Asia to Africa.
So it's all about creating a support system that doesn't depend on just one country.
Exactly. And it's about finding things they can agree on and work together on that will benefit everyone involved. It might mean becoming closer with China economically or exploring new security partnerships with countries in their region. It might even mean finding ways to talk to Russia even though they're fighting right now so that they can figure out how to have a more stable future.
It sounds like it's a really delicate balancing act, trying to stay on good terms with all these different countries that might want different things.
It definitely is, but that's just the reality of this new world order. Diplomacy, strategic thinking, and being willing to compromise are more important now than ever before.
So what should our listeners take away from this? What does all of this mean for regular people?
I think the most important thing to remember is this: the world is changing, and the old ideas about power and who has influence are not true anymore. We're entering a new time, one that is more complex, more unpredictable, and where everyone is more connected than ever before.
And that means we all need to pay attention, stay informed, and be involved in what's going on around us. The decisions that world leaders make affect our lives directly, whether we realize it or not.
You're absolutely right. We can't just sit back and watch what happens in this new world. We need
All
to
right.
be active participants, demanding more from our leaders and working together to create a future that is fairer and more peaceful for everyone.
Well said. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this incomplete talk we've talked about a lot today, from that explosive meeting between Trump and Zelensky to the bigger changes in how power is shifting around the world.
It's been a really interesting conversation, and hopefully it's made everyone think a little bit about the world we live in and the challenges we're facing.
If you're interested in learning more about any of the things we've talked about today, make sure you check out the resources we've included in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more incomplete talks with Mohsen and Mammal like this. We have a lot of great content coming up, including a deep dive into whether a Trump return would be good or bad for Pakistan. So hit that subscribe button and join us next time for another Incomplete Talks with Mohsen and Mammal.